The sharp sound of a palm connecting with a cheek reverberated, instantly silencing the crowded courtroom. A decorated police officer had just struck a sitting member of Parliament, but before the collective gasp of the onlookers could fully form, she spun, planted her heel, and delivered a powerful right cross. He crumpled to the floor, completely unconscious. The atmosphere within courtroom 302 of the High Court was thick with an almost suffocating tension. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in November, yet inside the mahogany-paneled chamber it felt like a pressure cooker on the verge of a catastrophic rupture. Seated at the witness stand was Detective Inspector Thomas Rohr. Rohr was a man who wore his authority like a heavy, impenetrable suit of armor. For 22 years, he had patrolled the city's most challenging districts, amassing commendations, medals, and a formidable reputation. However, the streets also whispered a more sinister truth about Rohr. He operated as his own law, a man who fabricated evidence, intimidated witnesses, and proceeded with the absolute conviction that the badge he wore rendered him a deity among mortals. He had weathered internal affairs investigations, civilian complaints, and media exposés. Within the precinct, he was known as the Teflon Detective. Nothing ever seemed to stick until this day. Standing a few feet away, meticulously organizing her legal documents, was Josephine Caldwell. Josephine was not merely a distinguished Queen's Counsel, she was the recently elected Member of Parliament for the very district of Rohr had terrorized for 2 decades. Josephine was a force of nature. Born into a working-class family, her father, a former heavyweight boxer, and her mother, a stern schoolteacher, she had fought tooth and nail for every inch of progress she had ever achieved. She carried the aspirations, the sorrows, and the simmering anger of thousands of marginalized constituents on her shoulders. This civil rights tribunal was highly unusual. Given the extreme nature of the corruption charges involving Rohr's brutalization of a 19-year-old honors student named David Henderson, Parliament had sanctioned a special joint inquiry. Josephine, leveraging her legal expertise, had successfully petitioned to lead the cross-examination. This was personal to her district, and she was not about to let a junior prosecutor bungle this opportunity. "Let us review the events of the night of October 14th, Josephine began, her voice calm, resonant, and utterly devoid of any trace of intimidation. She stepped away from the podium, her dark blue suit impeccably tailored, her posture exuding an aura of absolute authority. Rohr leaned back in the wooden witness chair, crossing his arms over his broad chest, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. He regarded Josephine not as an MP or opposing counsel, but as an insignificant annoyance he was eager to dismiss. "I've already detailed the events in my official report, Miss Caldwell. I apologize if the terminology is too complex for a politician to comprehend." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Arthur Pendleton, a severe man with absolutely no tolerance for courtroom theatrics, rapped his gavel once. "Watch your tone, Inspector. You will address the MP with the respect her office and her role as counsel demand." Rohr's jaw tightened, but the arrogant glint in his eyes remained undimmed. "My apologies, MP Caldwell. As I stated, the suspect was resisting arrest. I employed the standard sanctioned force required to subdue a hostile threat." "Sanctioned force," Josephine repeated, tasting the words as if they were acrid. She picked up a remote control from her desk. "Inspector, your official report indicates that David Henderson lunged at you with a weapon, compelling you to strike him repeatedly in self-defense. It also states that your body camera malfunctioned during the altercation. Is that correct?" "That is correct." "Technology fails," Rohr stated, shifting his weight. "It's an unfortunate reality of the job, but my word is my bond, and my record speaks for itself." "Oh, it certainly does," Josephine replied, her tone chillingly pleasant. "But we are not relying on your word today. We are relying on the dash cam of a civilian who happened to be parked across the street. A camera you were unaware of, Inspector." The color drained from Roar's face just a fraction, but Josephine noticed it. The gallery leaned forward in unison, the wooden pews creaking under the shifting weight of reporters, police union representatives, and David Henderson's weeping family. Josephine pressed the button. The large monitor mounted on the courtroom wall flickered to life. The footage was grainy, but the streetlights illuminated the alleyway perfectly. It showed young David Henderson backed against a brick wall, his hands raised high in the air, open and empty. It depicted Inspector Roar stepping into the frame, entirely unprovoked, and delivering a brutal blow to the boy's abdomen, followed by a vicious barrage of strikes that sent the teenager collapsing onto the pavement. There was no weapon. There was no lunge. There was only a predator destroying prey. The courtroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps, angry shouts, and the frantic clicking of press cameras. Judge Pendleton's gavel pounded violently against its block. "Order! Order in this court!" Roar sat frozen, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests of his chair. His Teflon armor had just been irrevocably cracked. The absolute silence that followed the judge's outburst was heavier than before. Josephine walked slowly toward the witness stand, stopping just a few feet from Roar. She looked down at him, her eyes blazing with a righteous, furious fire. "No weapon, Inspector," she whispered, though the microphone picked it up, projecting it into every corner of the room. "No resistance, just a boy with his hands in the air and a coward with a badge. Tell me, Inspector, when you were falsifying your official police report, a felony under the Police Act, did you consider the 20 years in prison you were risking, or were you simply so accustomed to getting away with it that you didn't care?" Roar's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his collar. His defense attorney, Richard Sterling, leaped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness." Sustained. MP Caldwell, "Dial it back," Judge Pendleton warned, though his own eyes were fixed on the screen in disgust. "The court will take a brief 15-minute recess to allow the defense to review this new evidence. We are adjourned." As the judge retreated to his chambers, the courtroom devolved into a buzzing hive of frantic whispers and ringing cell phones. Reporters sprinted for the heavy oak doors to relay the breaking news to their networks. Thomas Roar was finished. His career, his pension, his freedom, all of it had just evaporated in the span of 30 seconds of grainy video footage. Josephine turned her back on the witness stand, returning to her desk to organize her files. She felt a profound sense of relief, a heavy burden lifting from her chest. She had delivered justice for David. She had done what she was elected to do. But Roar was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a cornered animal, pumped full of adrenaline, rage, and a terrifying realization of his impending doom. His mind snapped. The rules of the courtroom, the law he had sworn to uphold, the presence of witnesses, none of it mattered anymore. All he saw was the woman who had just destroyed his life. Instead of following his frantic attorney toward the side exit, Roar stepped down from the witness box. His heavy boots thudded against the hardwood floor, closing the distance between him and Josephine with alarming speed. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Roar hissed, his voice a venomous, guttural growl. Josephine didn't flinch. She slowly turned around to face him, standing tall. "I think you need to step back, Inspector. Speak to your counsel. You ruined my life." Roar spat, stepping so close she could smell the stale coffee and sharp tang of sweat radiating off him. He was towering over her, attempting to use his sheer physical size to intimidate her, just as he had done to countless civilians in the dark alleys of her district. "You ruined your own life, Roar. Now step away from my desk," Josephine commanded, her voice ringing out clearly in the thinning but still populated courtroom. Several people stopped in their tracks. Wordy guards stationed by the doors began to walk briskly down the center aisle, sensing the escalating hostility. "You arrogant, self-righteous," Roar sneered, leaning in closer, his face contorted in absolute hatred. He lowered his voice so only she could hear the vile, racially charged slur that dripped from his lips. Josephine's eyes narrowed, but she remained perfectly still. She didn't shrink. She didn't look away. Her unwavering defiance was the final spark dropped into the powder keg of Roar's fragile, shattering ego. In a blind, impulsive flash of fury, Roar's massive right hand whipped through the air. Crack! The sound of his open palm striking Josephine's cheek echoed like a gunshot. The impact was brutal, forceful enough to snap her head to the side and send her heavy legal pad flying from her hands, scattering white papers across the floor like dead leaves. Time seemed to freeze. The defense attorney, Richard Sterling, froze with his mouth agape. The journalists lingering in the gallery stopped breathing. A police officer striking an MP, a prosecutor, a woman in open court. It was an act of career suicide so spectacular and violent it defied logic. Roar stood there for a microsecond, his chest heaving, a twisted look of grim satisfaction washing over his flushed face as he watched her head turn from the blow. He expected her to fall. He expected her to cry, to break, to finally show him the fear he demanded from the world. He had severely miscalculated. Josephine Caldwell was the daughter of a heavyweight boxer. She had spent her teenage years in a gritty South London boxing gym, learning how to take a hit, how to plant her feet, and how to harness kinetic energy. She didn't stumble. She didn't reach up to clutch her stinging cheek, using the momentum from his own strike. Josephine pivoted sharply on her right foot. Her hips twisted, transferring power from her legs through her core and directly into her right shoulder. Her fist clenched into a solid rock of bone and knuckle before Roar even had time to lower his hand. Josephine's right hook launched with terrifying speed and flawless practiced precision. Thud. Her knuckles connected squarely with the side of Roar's jaw, right on the button. The sickening crunch of bone and cartilage echoed through the stunned silence. The lights instantly went out in Roar's eyes. His massive body went completely rigid, his knees buckling underneath him in a split second. The 220-pound detective crashed to the hardwood floor like a felled oak tree, his head bouncing once against the wood with a hollow thwack. He didn't twitch. He was out cold before he even hit the ground. For 3 agonizingly long seconds, the courtroom was plunged into a silence so profound it was deafening. Josephine stood over his unconscious body. She calmly adjusted the lapels of her suit jacket, flexing her right hand slightly to ease the stinging in her knuckles. A thin trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth where Roar's ring had caught her lip, but her expression was one of cold, unbothered stone. "Bailiff," Josephine said, her voice slicing through the dead air, steady and completely devoid of panic. "Please arrest this man for assaulting a member of Parliament." Chaos erupted. The courtroom exploded into absolute bedlam. Bailiffs rushed the well, some instinctively moving to protect Josephine, while others surrounded the motionless body of Detective Inspector Thomas Roar. Judge Arthur Pendleton burst out of his chambers, his robes billowing, demanding to know what had transpired in the 60 seconds he was absent. Defense attorney Richard Sterling was stammering, his hands hovering over his unconscious client, unable to articulate the sheer lunacy he had just witnessed. Paramedics arrived within minutes, pushing a stretcher through the double doors. Roar, finally groaning and blinking his eyes open, found himself staring up at the fluorescent ceiling lights. His jaw throbbed with an agony he had never known, swelling rapidly into a grotesque, plum-colored lump. Before he could even sit up, a heavy set of steel handcuffs was clicked around his wrists, binding him to the rails of the gurney. "You are under arrest for the assault of a sitting member of parliament," a uniformed court officer stated coldly, reading him his rights. As the paramedics wheeled him out, the reporters in the gallery, who had captured the entire altercation on their smartphones, were already uploading the raw footage to every major network and social media platform on the globe. By sunset, the video had been viewed 40 million times. The internet dubbed it the knockout heard round the world. Josephine Caldwell wasn't just an MP anymore. She became an overnight international symbol of resistance against unchecked authority. Hashtags demanding Roar's immediate imprisonment trended at #1 worldwide. However, cornered beasts are the most dangerous, and the establishment protecting Roar was not ready to surrender. The next morning, the Police Benevolent Association held an emergency press conference. Union boss Patrick Higgins, a bulldog of a man with a notorious reputation for defending dirty cops, stood before a podium bristling with microphones. "What we saw yesterday was a gross overreaction by a trained fighter," Higgins barked into the cameras, attempting the most audacious gaslighting campaign in modern political history. MP Caldwell is the daughter of a professional boxer. She possesses lethal training. Inspector Roar, who was under immense psychological distress, lightly slapped her in a moment of panic. Her response was a premeditated, disproportionate use of deadly force. "We are calling for an immediate ethical inquiry into MP Caldwell's conduct, and we demand assault charges be pressed against her." It was a staggering twist. They were attempting to turn the victim into the aggressor. The smear campaign didn't stop there. Anonymous sources began leaking to tabloid newspapers, trying to paint Josephine as temperamental, aggressive, and unfit for office. They heavily emphasized her South London boxing roots, attempting to weaponize her working-class survival skills against her. For a terrifying 48 hours, the narrative wobbled. Pundits on conservative news networks began debating whether Josephine had used excessive self-defense. The establishment was closing ranks, building a formidable blue wall of silence and spin around Thomas Roar. Josephine, however, refused to take the bait. She called no press conferences to defend her character. She released only one brief, devastatingly concise statement from her office. "I defended my physical person against an unprovoked, felonious assault. My focus remains entirely on securing justice for David Henderson and the dozens of other victims terrorized by Inspector Roar. The truth does not need a PR team." The union thought they had the upper hand, relying on the public's notoriously short attention span. But they failed to account for the one thing that always destroys a corrupt system: an insider with a conscience. The turning point came not from a crusading politician, a brilliant investigative journalist, or a seasoned federal prosecutor. The fatal blow to Thomas Roar's empire of corruption came from the passenger seat of his own patrol cruiser. Detective Sergeant Brian Miller had ridden alongside Roar for 5 long, suffocating years. He had learned early on that to survive in Roar's precinct, you kept your mouth shut, your eyes forward, and your pen ready to sign off on whatever fabricated incident report Roar shoved across the dashboard. But Miller had watched the courtroom video from the dim, isolating glow of his living room television. He had seen the absolute, undisguised disdain in Roar's eyes when he struck Josephine Caldwell. More importantly, he watched the union's grotesque, calculated media campaign attempting to destroy a woman who had simply stood her ground and defended herself. It broke something fundamental inside Miller. The years of looking the other way, of justifying Roar's tough policing as a necessary evil, suddenly tasted like battery acid in his throat. Late on a torrential Thursday night, with rain lashing against the windshield of his unmarked car, Miller pulled into the visitor parking lot of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's regional field office. He didn't come empty-handed. Tucked inside the inside pocket of his damp trench coat was a meticulously hidden, encrypted external hard drive. It was a drive Rohr had explicitly entrusted him to throw into the river 2 years prior, a drive Miller had quietly kept hidden in his floorboards as a desperate insurance policy. When Miller slid that silver drive across the metal table to FBI Special Agent Harrison Reed, the blue wall of silence didn't just crack, it was utterly obliterated. The hard drive was a Pandora's box of absolute, undeniable corruption. It contained thousands of deleted dashcam videos that Rohr thought were permanently wiped. It held unedited raw bodycam footage showing unprovoked beatings, illegal searches, and cash being skimmed off the top of drug busts. But the most damning piece of evidence was an audio recording from a bugged informant's wire that Rohr hadn't realized was hot. On track 4, Rohr's unmistakable gravelly voice was captured, laughing uproariously about planting a stolen firearm in young David Henderson's backpack. "You got to teach these smart-mouth kids who owns the concrete," Rohr was recorded saying, the ice clinking in his glass in the background. "That MP Caldwell thinks she can come down here and audit my streets. I'll bury that Henderson kid so deep under federal charges she'll spend her entire term writing apology letters to his mother." When the contents of the hard drive were securely verified, unsealed, and strategically leaked to the press by federal prosecutors, the fallout was apocalyptic. Karma didn't just knock on Rohr's door. It kicked the hinges clean off. Union boss Patrick Higgins, the man who had loudly demanded Josephine's arrest just days prior, resigned in total disgrace before the sun even came up, fleeing the city to avoid reporters. The mayor immediately and publicly condemned Rohr, desperately attempting to salvage his own sinking political career. As for Rohr himself, the universe had a dark, poetic sense of justice in store for him. At 4 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, exactly 1 week after he had tried to humiliate Josephine Caldwell in open court, a heavily armed federal tactical team surrounded Rohr's upscale suburban home. They didn't bother ringing the doorbell. A battering ram shattered his front door, and laser sights cut through the darkness of his hallway. Rohr, previously the untouchable titan of the precinct, was dragged out onto his front lawn in his pajamas. His jaw, still heavily wired shut from Josephine's devastating right hook, throbbed in agony as federal agents forced him face down into the wet grass. He couldn't even articulate a protest. He could only mumble through his wired teeth as the Mirandized warnings were read to him by a rookie agent half his age. The ensuing trial bypassed a civil inquiry entirely. It was a massive, highly publicized federal criminal prosecution. Josephine Caldwell was called to the witness stand once more, but this time she wasn't asking the questions. She was the star witness for the prosecution, watching as the mountain of digital evidence did all the talking. Rohr sat at the defense table, a hollow, pathetic shell of the arrogant predator he had once been. His suit hung loosely on his now gaunt frame. Having shed 30 pounds due to a liquid diet necessitated by his fractured jaw, the veneer of invincibility was shattered, replaced by a stark awareness of his own mortality. Judge Arthur Pendleton, presiding over the criminal proceedings, cast a gaze of profound, undisguised contempt upon Rohr during the final sentencing. The courtroom was filled to its capacity, hushed in anticipation of the judgment. "Thomas Rohr," the judge's voice resonated, amplified by the oak-paneled room, "you were entrusted with the solemn and weighty responsibility of safeguarding the populace. Instead, you conducted yourself as a despot and a ruffian. You infringed upon the constitutional liberties of blameless citizens. You manufactured falsified evidence to obliterate a young man's existence. And then, in an act of astonishing, blinding arrogance, you physically assaulted a sitting member of Parliament within the confines of my courtroom once your transgressions were finally brought to light." The judge paused, adjusting his spectacles, allowing the oppressive gravity of the moment to bear down on Rohr. "The irony is not lost on this bench," Pendleton continued, his tone hardening. that you attempted to stifle justice through physical aggression, only to find yourself physically subdued by the very woman you sought to intimidate. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal penitentiary with no prospect of early release. You are permanently divested of your pension, your rank, and your liberty. Officers, remove him from my presence." The resounding clang of the handcuffs fastening around Roar's wrists echoed the very sound made on the day he had attacked Josephine. This time, however, the click was irreversible. Retribution had delivered a definitive, inescapable final blow. As Roar was escorted down the central aisle, his head bowed and shackles clinking against his ankles, he met Josephine's gaze one last time. There was no gloating, no triumphant smirk. She simply observed his departure with a dispassionate, chilling indifference. A silent sentinel who had finally banished the spectre terrorizing her community. Emerging from the courthouse, the dense London clouds finally parted, permitting brilliant, clear sunlight to cascade upon the marble steps. David Henderson's mother, her frame quivering with a blend of weariness and overwhelming elation, embraced Josephine, tears of profound relief streaming down her face. Justice had been deferred. It had been fiercely contested, but thanks to the resilience of one woman's unbreakable spirit and unyielding resolve, it had not been denied. What are your thoughts on Member of Parliament Josephine Caldwell's remarkable real-life takedown and the immense wave of karmic justice that ensued? If this narrative of brutal justice and defiance against a corrupt system captivated you, please show your appreciation by hitting the like button. Do not forget to forward this video to your associates and subscribe to the channel for more astonishing true crime accounts presented regularly.